abandoned by her rich husband and pregnant with twins. But the doctor saved her life forever. Hey, beautiful souls, and welcome to Alcot Stories, where every emotion finds a home and every silence has a voice. I'm so glad you're here with me today. Before we dive into another heart-deep journey, I want to know, where in the world are you watching me from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I love seeing how far our little storytelling family reaches. Lila Hart stood in the sterile hospital bathroom, the soft hum of fluorescent lights above her, and stared at the pregnancy test trembling in her hand, the two pink lines bleeding through the plastic window, like whispered confirmations of a fate. She hadn't imagined navigating alone. Her oversized sweatshirt clung awkwardly to her swollen belly, 20 weeks along now, and yet the stretch of fabric couldn't hide the ache blooming across her chest, an ache deeper than any physical transformation. Outside, the world spun unbothered, but inside this tiled cocoon, time held its breath. She read the test again, as if the result would somehow change, as if she could will away the finality of Daniel's absence, the man who had once kissed her wrists and whispered promises under strings of fairy lights. Now all that remained of him was a yellow post-it note stuck to the bathroom mirror back home, the ink slightly smudged from a tear she never admitted was hers. Following my dreams. That was it. No explanation, no goodbye. Just a coward's flourish masquerading as purpose. For 3 weeks, silence nested in every room of their home. No calls, no footsteps, no remorse. And Lila had moved like a ghost through each hour, a woman learning to be a mother in the quiet shadow of heartbreak. Her only inheritance, the gold hoop earrings her late mother gave her, felt like anchors she traced now with absent fingers, a tactile memory of strength she didn't yet believe she possessed. When her name was finally called softly, like a thread being tugged loose, it belonged to Dr. Elias Carter, a man whose tailored coat didn't quite hide the fatigue around his eyes, or the curious softness that lingered when he noticed she had come alone. She followed him wordlessly, her footsteps a fraction too slow, too heavy with everything she wasn't saying. Inside the dimly lit room, the hum of the ultrasound machine filled the space between them, and when the screen bloomed with motion, 2 fluttering heartbeats, rhythmic and strong, her breath caught on a sob. "They're perfect," Elias murmured, his voice quieter than the machine's, gentler than the storm she carried inside. He handed her a tissue, and for a moment, time pressed pause again, his hand brushing hers. The briefest connection, accidental or intentional, she didn't know. Tears blurred her vision as she stared at the monitor. Twins, not one child to raise alone, but 2 lives who would soon rely on her entirely. She wondered if they could hear the war inside her, the grief, the fear, the stubborn hope. She wondered if they would someday ask why their father left, and how she could ever answer that without bitterness leaking into her voice. Elias didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. His gaze flicked once to the pale indentation on her finger where a ring had recently lived, a ghost of commitment, a scar shaped like gold. She noticed the same mark on his hand and wondered what kind of story sat beneath his skin. He didn't offer pity, and for that she was grateful. He simply nodded once, like a man who understood what it meant to be left and still keep standing. She slid off the exam table slowly, every movement deliberate, as if gravity had grown heavier in this room. "Thank you," she whispered, voice hoarse, barely audible. But he met her eyes and replied, "You don't have to thank me for showing you what you already carry." She almost cried again at that. How did he know? The strength she doubted, the love she feared wouldn't be enough. The fractured pieces she held together for the sake of the tiny hearts inside her. As she walked back down the corridor, the hospital lights shimmered through her tears, halos in a cathedral of antiseptic walls, and for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel entirely invisible. The doors opened into the waiting room, where nothing had changed. The same peeling magazine covers, the same flickering vending machine, But Lila's world had shifted. She wasn't just waiting anymore. She was preparing. She was surviving. She was becoming... And behind her, Dr. Carter watched through the narrow glass pane, his expression unreadable except for the flicker of something, recognition, perhaps, or the memory of his own unraveling. And without knowing exactly why, Leila reached for her mother's earrings again, her fingers closing around them like a prayer, steadying herself as the storm passed quietly. Not gone, but no longer in control. The first sign of his return was not a phone call or apology, but a sleek black car parked across the street from Lila's modest row house, gleaming beneath the late October rain like an omen. Daniel Sterling stepped out in a tailored coat that reeked of expensive reinvention, his arm draped casually around a woman with champagne blonde, curls and a ring too large to be tasteful. They walked up her steps like they still belonged there, and when Lila opened the door, Luna crying in her arms, Stella asleep on her shoulder, Daniel didn't ask how she was or if the babies were healthy. Instead, he handed her a manila envelope with a polished smirk. "Full custody," he said, as though it were a business transaction. His fiancée offered a tight smile, one Lila could smell the judgment behind. "You've been overwhelmed, haven't you?" she added lightly, like they were talking about clutter in a closet, not the hollow terror of raising newborn twins alone. Lila didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply closed the door in their faces and locked it twice, then slid down to the floor with Luna still in her arms, her pulse hammering in her ears. That night, after the twins were asleep, she stood in front of the bathroom mirror, whispering affirmations that cracked halfway through. "You are not broken. You are enough. You are their mother." A week passed before she ran into Elias again at the all-night grocery store, where the quiet shelves and hum of freezers felt safer than her own thoughts. She reached for the last jar of pickles at the same time as he did, and their fingers brushed. "Looks like our cravings clash," he smiled gently, and she exhaled something close to a laugh. They ended up sitting in the parking lot in his car, sipping burnt coffee from paper cups as the storm drummed against the roof. In the dim interior, Elias told her about Noah, his 8-year-old son who now lived in a different school district and only saw his father 2 weekends a month, when the lawyers allowed. "They called me an absentee dad because I work 14-hour shifts," he said, eyes fixed on the rain streaking the windshield. "But no one asked what I was working for." Lila listened, her heart folding inwards. "They're trying to take my girls," she murmured, as if giving birth during a custody hearing was some performance of instability. He turned to her then, something fierce and unwavering in his voice. "You are not unstable. You are exhausted, yes. Grieving, yes. But those babies have never known a day without your heartbeat next to theirs." His words settled into her like warmth. But calm didn't last long. A week later, photos surfaced, grainy, black and whites of her and Elias, leaving the hospital after a false labor scare. Her face flushed, eyes red, one hand gripping his, the other clutching her side. The PI's watermark stained every corner of the printouts. Daniel's lawyer slid across the courtroom table. "Romantic involvement," the lawyer sniffed, "during a medically fragile pregnancy. Questionable judgment." Lila gritted her teeth, her jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. Elias, summoned to testify, refused to retreat. "Let them see," he said to her outside the courthouse, voice low but steady. "Let them see a mother fighting for her children, not hiding love out of fear." The hearing blurred around her, legalese in clipped tones, Daniel's smug expression, his fiancée's performative tears. But what Lila remembered most was standing up when called and saying with a voice more steel than silk, "I do not owe you perfection. I owe my daughter's protection." Her hands didn't shake. Her heart did. That night, Elias found her sitting on the kitchen floor, surrounded by unfolded laundry and unopened mail, and he sat down beside her without a word. For a long while they didn't speak. Then he said, "If you fall apart, I will help you pick up every piece." Lila turned to him slowly, her eyes hollowed by weeks of tension, but behind them, something still glowed, faint but defiant. "I'm scared," she whispered. "So am I," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "But fear isn't failure, and you don't have to do any of this alone anymore." She didn't kiss him, not yet, but her head fell onto his shoulder, and in that quiet space, with the twins stirring faintly on the baby monitor, she felt for the first time in a long time, not abandoned but chosen. The storm outside softened, and in the lull between thunder, she could almost believe that love wasn't a threat to custody, but a kind of custody itself, a promise to stay, to witness, to hold. The night the contraction started, the world outside the classroom window seemed impossibly distant, as if time had folded inward to trap Lila, heart in a pocket of pain and urgency. She wasn't ready to face alone. At 34 weeks, the twins had barely begun to prepare for the outside. Yet her body was betraying her with every tightening, wave that rolled through her like an unforgiving tide. Elias was already there, his white scrubs clinging to his sweat-dampened skin, the scent of antiseptic mingling with the faint trace of coffee and determination that never left him. His eyes, usually so composed, flickered with a raw panic beneath the surface as he rushed through the classroom door, instantly shedding any professional detachment. "Breathe through it," he whispered, his hand sliding into hers, fingers locking as if they could anchor her to calm, with nothing but their grasp. The beeping monitors lined up against the sterile walls, echoed in the room like a heartbeat song. But Lila's world shrank to the pressure of Elias's palm, the sharp edge of pain, and the knowledge that the battle was no longer just for her survival, but for the fragile lives growing within. The sound of the classroom door crashing open startled them. Daniel, wild-eyed and furious, barged in, his voice slicing through the tension with a demand for updates he was never entitled to. Lila's response was a hiss, fierce and protective, cutting through the courtroom drama and legal facades he'd tried to impose. "You don't even know their names, Stella and Luna." The words hung heavy in the air, a challenge and a shield both, as if naming them aloud forged a barrier Daniel could not cross. Elias's voice cracked later in the courtroom, the strain of months and months, boiling over as he testified with every ounce of conviction in his being. "Lila Hart is the strongest mother I've ever met." There was no bravado, no exaggeration, only truth distilled through tired eyes and a heart that had witnessed the battle firsthand. The judge, faced with the gravity of the moment, adjourned the hearing, a breath held in suspension as the room collectively absorbed the weight of Elias's words. And just then, as if the universe could no longer hold its tension, Lila's water broke on the stand, unexpected, untimely, a raw and vulnerable declaration that life would not wait for court rulings or legal maneuvers. Chaos erupted around her, voices overlapping, nurses rushing forward, Daniel's stunned silence cutting sharper than any accusation. Elias was instantly at her side, steady hands and a steady heart amidst the storm, murmuring reassurances as he helped her to a nearby chair. In that moment, the fractured boundaries between their worlds shattered completely. There was no courtroom battle here, no custody dispute, only a shared fight for the breath of two tiny girls, already fighting their own battle to arrive. Lila's eyes found Elias's, searching for strength, and found a fierce determination that promised she would never face anything alone again. The labor was grueling, each contraction a reminder of vulnerability and courage intertwined, and Elias remained her anchor, whispering through the pain, coaxing her to hold on just a little longer. When Stella was born, her first cry piercing and unyielding, Elias caught her hand and squeezed it as if it could transmit every ounce of love and protection. He vowed to give them all. Luna followed, quieter but no less fierce. And in the soft glow of the delivery room lights, Lila felt a surge of something profound, a fierce love that erased every doubt, every fear. Daniel, frozen in the doorway, was a ghost from a past life. His whispered admission, "They're beautiful," a fragile thread in the tapestry of broken promises and new beginnings. Lila, exhausted but radiant, placed Luna gently in his arms, her voice steady despite the storm inside. "You can be their father without destroying me." In that moment, the courtroom and hospital blended into a crucible of transformation, where boundaries were tested and broken, and where new alliances forged in pain and hope began to take root. Elias's testimony, delivered with trembling conviction, became not just words, but a declaration of faith in a mother who refused to yield. And when the judge finally adjourned, it felt less like an ending and more like the fragile dawn of a new chapter, one written in resilience, fierce love, and the unwavering bond of family born in adversity. The hospital room pulsed with a hush that wasn't quiet, filled with the rhythm of beeping monitors, the low murmur of nurses, and the faint hum of possibility trembling in the air. Elias had shed his white coat as if stripping away the barrier between doctor and man, standing beside Lila not as a physician, but as the one who had witnessed her every moment of rising through the storm. She lay pale but determined, sweat beading on her brow, fingers digging into his as though clinging to the edge of a world that was cracking open. The lights overhead blurred slightly in her vision, the pain slicing through her in sharp crescendos that stole her breath, but not her will. With one final push, a cry pierced the air, raw, full, defiantly alive, and then she saw her, Stella, tiny and red and wailing, as if announcing herself to the stars. Lila sobbed, not in fear or agony, but in a release so vast it shook her. Elias gently cradled Stella for a moment before placing her against Lila's chest, his voice trembling as he whispered, "She's perfect." But the moment was far from over. Another wave of pain surged and Lila gritted her teeth, her body already exhausted, but still summoning strength for one more life. Luna emerged moments later, quieter, eyes wide, taking in the world with a haunting calm. She didn't cry immediately, and the brief silence sent a spear of terror through Lila's chest. But then, a soft, throaty sound came, not a scream, but a steady, stubborn hum, as if Luna had decided to announce herself on her own terms. The nurses murmured reassurances while cleaning her gently, and when Lila held her second daughter, the room seemed to still, as though even time bowed before the sacred weight of new life. Then came Daniel, standing in the doorway as if tethered between the man he'd been and the one he might become. The swagger was gone, the certainty hollowed out. He didn't move closer, just stared as if watching a dream he didn't deserve. "They're beautiful," he whispered, and in that single stunned breath, the facade he'd worn so easily began to crack. Lila, her voice ragged and soft, cradled Luna closer and met his eyes without flinching. "You can be their father," she said, slow and deliberate, "without destroying me." There was no malice, no threat, only truth, handed to him like a fragile key to redemption. Daniel stepped forward as if drawn by gravity, reaching tentatively as Stella's hand shot out and curled around his finger, tiny, unknowing, but impossibly strong. His knees buckled slightly, and he dropped into the chair beside Lila's bed, staring at the infant with a reverence that seemed foreign on his once arrogant face. Elias said nothing, his presence quiet but firm, one hand still resting protectively against Lila's shoulder. The three of them, mother, father, and something in between, sat in a triangle of tension and tenderness, broken history and newborn possibility. Stella yawned, a soft hiccup escaping her, while Luna blinked slowly, as though watching everyone with ancient eyes. In that moment, nothing was resolved. Custody, forgiveness, futures, but something sacred had shifted. The silence wasn't cold now, but weighted with meaning. Elias leaned in and kissed Lila's temple, whispering, "You did it." Not as an affirmation, but as a declaration. Of Bor. She closed her eyes, exhausted beyond language, but in the arms of safety, of possibility, of a love that had grown not from ease, but from ruin and rebuilding. Daniel reached up to wipe his eyes, and for once, he didn't try to hide the fact that he was crying. Not the performative tears of a man trying to manipulate an image, but the stunned sorrow of someone realizing too late the depth of what he'd abandoned. Lila didn't soften, but she didn't harden either. She allowed the moment its complexity, allowed him to feel, to regret, to try. The nurses moved around them quietly, respectful of the gravity in the air, placing ID bands on the tiny wrists of Stella and Luna, as if crowning them with proof of identity and belonging. Outside the window, snow had started to fall, silent, soft, inevitable, like the turning of a page, and in the stillness that followed the storm, as Elias wrapped an arm around Lila and Daniel, whispered the girls' names aloud like a benediction. The room became something holy, not whole yet, but becoming. A year later, the world had softened at the edges, as if time itself had exhaled and given permission for something new to bloom. The crisp scent of autumn threaded through the air in golden strokes as leaves tumbled lazily from the trees, each one a flicker of fire against the cooling sky. Stella's tiny shoes crunched across the picnic blanket with wild, unsteady delight, while Luna took her more cautious steps nearby, eyes fixed in deep concentration, one hand reaching for balance and the other clutching a dandelion fluff like it held all the answers. Layla sat cross-legged beneath a tall oak, her hair windswept and cheeks flushed, watching their daughters with a kind of awe that never dulled. A thermos of cider steamed quietly at her side, untouched, forgotten in the joy of the moment. Elias knelt a few feet away, his knees pressing into the red and orange plaid of the blanket, heart thrumming with a strange new rhythm as he held a velvet box in shaking fingers. "Lila," he breathed, his voice nearly stolen by the breeze. "Dance with me forever?" The words were simple, but they cracked something open in her. The memory of hospital walls and courtroom battles, replaced now by little footsteps and laughter that carried through the trees. Inside the box, nestled like a secret, were twin sapphire stars, glinting in the sunlight, one for each girl, a mirror of their strength, their light. Layla covered her mouth, her eyes wide and glassy, not from surprise but from the recognition of everything they'd survived to get to this moment. "Yes," she whispered, her voice tremulous but sure. "Yes, Elias." He didn't rise immediately, just leaned into her hands as she cradled his face, the space between them dissolving like frost under sunlight. Not far away, Daniel stood with a camera slung around his neck, the lens forgotten as he watched the scene unfold with quiet reverence. He wasn't the same man who had once walked away with a note and a dream. His edges had been worn, down by guilt and weekends filled with learning how to braid tiny curls and read bedtime stories in silly voices. "You made me better," he said finally, not seeking forgiveness, just naming a truth. Lila turned, her expression soft but unreadable. "No," she replied gently. "They did." And it was true. Stella, with her boundless energy, and Luna, with her silent wisdom, had reshaped the people around them simply by being born, by demanding love with every breath and step. The girls clambered into Lila's lap, giggling, Luna trying to tug at the ring still in Elias's hand, Stella already trying to put a leaf on her father's head. Elias laughed, the sound full and startled, like joy that had been kept waiting. Daniel raised the camera and caught the frame, his daughters mid-laughter, their mother radiant, and the man beside her lost in love. Later, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in rose and fire, the family gathered their things, and Lila watched as Daniel zipped up Luna's jacket with tender precision, asking if she wanted her stuffed bear for the drive. She nodded, clutching it tight, and climbed into his arms with no hesitation. Co-parenting wasn't perfect. There were stumbles, miscommunications, late pickups, but there was effort, and slowly trust. The air turned brisk, and Elias wrapped Leela in his coat, his fingers brushing her ring as if to reassure himself it was real. "One step at a time," he murmured, watching Stella chase a squirrel, her laugh ringing across the grass. Lila leaned into him, their silhouettes casting long shadows behind them, and nodded, like learning to walk all over again. The metaphor was too fitting. Every choice now, every compromise, every shared joy was a step, not always steady but always forward. And in the distance, Daniel raised his camera again, not to record a possession, but a promise that no matter the past, he would be here, not just as a father, but as a better man. The trees swayed above them, and leaves fell like confetti from nature itself, celebrating not an ending, but a new rhythm. The music of their lives was no longer discordant. It had found a beat, a pulse, a new dance. The autumn winds had given way to a soft winter, and with it came a quiet recalibration of life, the kind that didn't announce itself, but settled gently like the first snow. Elias stood before the board of the hospital, resignation letter in hand, his voice steady even as his heart pounded. He wasn't walking away from medicine, just from the blurred lines that had once threatened to entangle what he now held sacred. "No more boundaries," he whispered later that night, tracing the curve of Leela's shoulder as they sat on the floor, beside the twins' crib, their breath quiet so as not to wake the girls. His kiss landed on her temple like a seal, not of possession but of promise. Leela's eyes glistened, not from fear or doubt, but from the quiet realization that she no longer carried the weight alone. The wedding came in spring, beneath a canopy of flowering dogwoods, where laughter floated like pollen, and guests whispered that something about the air felt lighter. Noah, now 8 and sporting a suit 2 sizes too big, clutched the ring box with solemn pride, glancing occasionally at Elias for reassurance. He hadn't called him Dad, not yet, but there was no mistaking the bond growing between them. A bridge built not from blood, but from patience and late night, board games and quiet conversations on the porch. Lila's dress flowed like a whisper of wind, soft ivory wrapped around a body that had known both birth and battle, grief and grace. She didn't walk down the aisle alone. Stella held her left hand, dragging a flower basket behind her like a forgotten chore, while Luna clung to her right, pausing every few steps to inspect a petal or cloud. The guests didn't laugh. They watched with tender silence, absorbing the miracle of a woman who had been left behind, now being led forward by the very lives that had once almost broken her. Elias waited at the end of the aisle, not with nerves but with reverence, as if he were witnessing not just a ceremony, but the completion of something long prophesied. His vows came not from a page, but from the marrow. You didn't need saving, Leela. You only ever needed space to bloom, and I thank the stars every day that I got to witness it. Her answer was quieter but no less fierce. You loved me at my edges, Elias. That's why I trust you with my center. Their kiss wasn't showy, but it rooted itself in everyone watching, leaving even Daniel blinking faster than normal as he held his new wife's hand and muttered something about allergies. The reception took place in the backyard of the house Elias had bought but let Lila transform, now filled with wildflower beds, wind chimes and drawings the twins had taped to windows like living wallpaper. Noah gave a toast, half memorized, half improvised, and managed to make the room laugh and cry in under 3 minutes. Lila watched him with a kind of soft pride. She never thought she'd extend beyond her own children, and when she caught Elias wiping his eyes, she simply took his hand and squeezed. Later, when the music swelled and guests began to dance, Lila didn't hesitate. She stepped into Elias's arms, head on his chest, their rhythm slow and certain. The twins darted around their feet in bursts of giggles, and jelly-stained dresses, while Noah filmed on an old camcorder Elias had fixed just for the occasion. Daniel danced too, awkwardly but earnestly, his wife cheering him on as Luna tugged at his tie. There were no speeches about forgiveness that night, only acts that proved it was already blooming. Leela caught herself staring at the sky between twirls, searching out the constellations she used to wish upon during the loneliest nights of her pregnancy. Now she whispered thanks instead of please. Inside the house, taped to the fridge, was a drawing Stella had made. Stick figures of 4 people holding hands beneath. A smiling son, Noah included, and Daniel too, standing off to the side, but still part of the picture. Lila's favorite moment came when she found Elias later that night sitting at the twins' bedside, reading them a story they'd already heard a dozen times. He didn't know she was watching, didn't realize his voice had softened into a kind of lullaby that wrapped around them like a second blanket. And in that hushed moment, beneath the lull of stars and the hum of their unspoken future, she saw it, not a fairy tale, not perfection, but a bond forged in the fire of real life, stronger than paper rings or perfect timing, unbreakable. Time, with its quiet hands, had brushed gentle strokes across the years, softening what once felt sharp and raw into something sacred. The old ache that had once sat heavy in Lila's chest no longer throbbed. Its echo lived only in memory, in gratitude. The dance studio came to life in a converted brick building on Charles Street, sunlight flooding the polished floors, through tall arched windows where mirrors stretched from corner to corner. The name, Stella Luna Movement, glowed in hand-painted letters above the door, and inside, women danced barefoot beside toddlers, shaking off shame and exhaustion in every plie and turn. Lila became more than a teacher. She was a harbor, a witness, a breathing reminder that broken beginnings didn't mean broken endings. Sometimes she'd pause mid-lesson and glance through the small window that framed the sidewalk, where Elias would appear, holding coffee and pushing a stroller or wrangling Noah, now nearly a teenager, through his latest growth spurt. At night, their house pulsed with life, messy and magic, mismatched socks on the floor, school art projects taped over light switches, and soft music humming from the old record player Elias had restored one winter. The kitchen became their sacred space, not just for meals, but for movement. Lila would sway slowly, barefoot on the tile, Luna asleep against her chest, her hair curling in the crook of Lila's neck like ivy, while Elias lifted Stella onto his shoulders and spun in exaggerated circles until her giggles became shrieks of laughter. "You're gonna break the ceiling fan again," Lila would warn, half laughing, half serious, and Elias would grin, that mischievous spark never dulled by time. Daniel, quieter now, but no longer the shadow that loomed, began showing up at recitals not just as an obligation, but with genuine wonder. He'd bring flowers, sometimes picked, sometimes store-bought, and sit beside his new wife, clapping the loudest when Luna nailed her solo or when Stella forgot her steps and improvised with a bow. One evening during a small showcase, Daniel took the mic, his voice steadier than expected. "You taught me love isn't control," he said to Lila, and though his voice cracked, there was no trace of bitterness, just the rough edge of truth softened by time. Lila smiled, not out of triumph but release, as if the final chain had slipped quietly from her wrist. Elias placed a hand at the small of her back, pride radiating like warmth. Their life was not seamless. No story ever truly is, but their seams had been sewn with intention. Thread by thread, every argument mended with apology, every doubt met with presence. Noah, now broad-shouldered and protective, referred to Stella and Luna as the girls, like a seasoned older brother, helping with homework and refereeing, tickle wars with the exasperation only siblings can summon. On weekends, the backyard bloomed with chalk drawings, tea parties and laughter that spilled into the street. Sometimes Lila caught herself watching it all, this constellation of love. They'd built not from disbelief, but from awe. Like standing beneath a sky filled with stars she'd once thought unreachable. Elias's research had begun gaining national attention. His name appeared in journals and conferences, but he always came home by dinner. "My best work's at this table," he'd say, kissing each forehead in a row like ritual. And Lila, now published herself in essays about motherhood and identity, would rest her head on his shoulder once the dishes were done, whispering the titles of the next chapter she hadn't yet written. Together, they had formed a home not defined by perfection, but by belonging. Even the walls seemed to hold memories, the chipped corner from Luna's first step, the faded handprint above the doorway where Stella had marked her growth, the penciled initials NSLE, Noah, Stella, Luna, Elias, carved in a small heart behind the pantry door. Love had not erased the pain, but it had rewritten the meaning. The silences that once echoed now felt like peace. The storms that once tore through them had cleared the sky for something truer. And every night, after bedtime stories and toothbrushing wars and last-minute glasses of water, Lila would slip her feet onto Elias's and let him lead her across the tile. No music, no audience, just breath and heartbeat and motion. Under the kitchen light, with their daughters safe, their son becoming a man, and a future neither of them had dared to imagine once now unfolding before them. They danced, not out of celebration, but out of understanding. Some silences she had once written are prisons, but some storms, those rare and ruinous ones, don't destroy. They cleanse. And this she knew, standing in the arms of the man who chose her every day and the life they'd fought for with every step. They had weathered it all. Together, they had learned to shine.